Hello, welcome back to IPBC Asia 2013 here in Singapore. Well, the conference heard today about the future of intellectual property licensing and protection here in Asia during the first half of the session this morning. And it seems that there's been great strides made in ensuring that IP holders are protected and are able to add value and monetize their assets. We're talking today to somebody who was, in a sense, a pioneer of the IP business here in Singapore. He's Guy Proulx, and he's the Chairman and Chief Executive of Transpacific IP. Thanks so much for making the time to talk to us today.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure.
So what sort of changes have you seen over the last 10 years? How have things developed?
In Asia, it's been a huge change, quite frankly. As I mentioned in my panel and to other people during the conference, when I started the company, intellectual property rights in Asia were not very well respected, and the rest of the world knew that, and they expected that. I think you've seen intellectual property or IPR being not only accepted, but now being a driver of a lot of the political policies that are coming out of various countries, whether it's China, even Bangkok, Thailand, and certainly Malaysia, Singapore. Everyone's driving forward on looking at ways to protect intellectual property, and then beyond that, how do you monetize or use the intellectual property that local companies end up owning to a degree that fosters greater GDP growth and or employment opportunities or other opportunities. So I think everyone's got it now, but there's still a ways to go in actually getting full recognition of rights here in Asia.
Doesn't it still take a cultural change, which hasn't yet happened? I mean, for as long as you can go just down the road here from the Pan Pacific Hotel where we are today, you can still buy, for example, bootlegged CD software and music and so on.
That's true, and there's some places you can go and it's even more common than say here in Singapore. They've done a reasonably good job here, but I see enforcement being one aspect that has to be improved. I think part of that is driven by, if you look at last year, there were more company-on-company litigation or assertion filings in China between Chinese companies than there were filed in the US. So you're starting to see companies, local companies, trying to protect their IP, and I think as you see more of that happening, you'll start seeing more of the enforcement and people generally getting their arms around intellectual property rights, and you'll start seeing some of those things go away.
But isn't it also the case that, let's take China, seeing that you mentioned that, if you have two local a plaintiff and a defendant who are both Chinese, you're probably still going to see a different outcome than if you were a plaintiff from a Western country taking a local Chinese company to task, wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely. Matter of fact, I wouldn't be a proponent of saying if you're a foreign company, go in and start asserting your rights or your intellectual property rights in China. That's probably a very difficult thing to do, and it may be downright foolish in most of the provinces where you try to do it. However, having said that, I think that as you see more and more Chinese companies looking to protect their rights, there's going to be an acceptance within China of foreign companies doing the same. Now, whether they get treated the same is a different issue, but I think that also has to come along, and I think the Chinese government is pushing that direction. I couldn't tell you how long it would take to get there.
So we've talked about a little bit about respect for IP. The next step, obviously, is to actually get people to pay for it. And as we all know, Asians love a good discount. Are you able to convince your customers' that they should pay fair valuation for intellectual property?
The short answer is yes. Now, the process of doing that is far more involved and I would say far more difficult in Asia, because you're right, Asian companies love a good discount, and nobody loves a discount better than probably the Chinese. So at the end of the day, you do have to do a lot of work. You got to state your case extremely well. You have to be pretty clear, and with any luck you have to hope that the other side understands enough about what you're talking about, and that's one of the issues that we've had to tackle over the years. Is just the knowledge level, in our case patents, understanding what the patent is, what it reads on, what it infringes, what it doesn't infringe, and how much that would be worth has been an ongoing discussion and training evolution through the whole region, and that's been a big issue over the years that I think we're finally starting to get getting some traction on that.
Let's talk about the future, and you've been in this business for around 20 years. Let's say in 10 years from now, something a little bit more graspable. What sort of changes do you foresee then? What sort of things will we be talking about at IPBC Asia 2023?
Oh, good question. Not sure I could. When I started this 10 years ago, I wasn't sure I'd be doing this, but let me take a shot at it. I think some of the things that are happening now, I think you're going to see more of that in Asia. It's not uncommon when you look to the US or Europe to see major companies do large consortium deals, i.e. the Nortel or the Novels, or you can talk about Rockstar. There's a lot of different things that happen, say, in North America and Europe that do not happen in Asia. I think you're going to start seeing that change. Back to your earlier question about getting them to pay or getting them willing to make fair value on a particular IP, I think you're going to have an easier time doing that later on down the road. As they become more adept at IP and IP strategy, they start seeing more of the value in a particular IP. Remember, a lot of these companies started out on the patent path because they were getting sued in the US. So they were looking to, defend ourselves. Well, we need some patents to do that. I better start filing some patents. They didn't necessarily even know what they should be filing, but they were filing applications, and then they'd go out and buy a few. So they're somewhat behind some of the more established companies that have very clear IP strategies. And so as those strategies start becoming more complex, more comprehensive, and they start getting better expertise at executing on those, I think you're going to start seeing some very positive things happen here in the region, very similar to some of the stuff that you see in North America and Europe today. Now, I hope that happens more in 5 years as opposed to 10. 10 years out, I think we're looking at perhaps a far different area here in terms of protecting IP. I think there'll be a lot more respect of intellectual property rights. I think that's where it's going to be very exciting.
Just now when you said that some of the things happening in the US and Europe are going to come to Asia, my first thought was non-participating or non-practicing entities or these patent holding companies. As we know, the Obama administration has tried to tighten the screws a little bit on frivolous litigation over patents. Therefore, is this coming to Asia of some of these things from the US and Europe really such a good thing?
Well, okay, so in fair disclosure, I guess I would be considered an NPA, as would be every university, every individual inventor, and everyone else out there. But having, are some of those things coming to Asia? In some degrees, they're already here. I think there already are NPEs. There are already NPEs, not just Trans-Pacific, but others that are working with Asian companies on making a stronger portfolio or helping them out in difficult situations. So I think to a large degree that's happening. There's certainly not the assertion side of that that's coming with it. You don't see a lot of assertions happening right here in Asia. There's, when people look to litigate, they think immediately of the US or potentially Europe, but less so here in Asia. I'm not sure that's going to change anytime soon. Some of it due to regulation, laws, courts.
Or the absence of those.
Or the absence of those, or I think just culturally it's not something that's done readily over here. Now, what may change that, and we're seeing some of that, I think, happening now, is just the economy at the time, right? If you look at Japan today, where they're having a very difficult time with the economy, 2-3 years ago, you couldn't talk to a Japanese company about selling assets. Now you can. I mean, they're starting to look at ways to monetize an asset that they have that's a big asset that they paid a lot of money for. Most of them have very large portfolios. And I think, so as there's changes in the economy and how the economy is doing, I think that's also going to be a driver here in Asia as far as how people use their IP.
Let's talk a little bit more about Asia in general, because obviously there are many countries in this region, all very disparate. Are there any dark horses, outside runners, who you think might overtake everybody else when it comes to intellectual property rights in your
I'm not sure it'd be an overtaking. I think there's some that are going to end up doing a better job at IPR than they're probably given credit for today, not unlike China was, say, 10 years ago. I think people would say, hey, they're doing a better job than we anticipated. But I think down in Southeast Asia, you're going to see some that are like that. Thailand would come to my mind. I think Malaysia's making a pretty strong attempt right now to look at IPR and how they can improve that and make some changes to a knowledge-based economy up in Malaysia. Certainly Singapore has. I wouldn't be surprised if the Philippines followed with something, at some point in time as well. Vietnam probably as well. So I think this particular region here, there's a lot of opportunity. A lot of people would probably look at me and say you're crazy, but I think there's a number of them that have, I know I've done meetings up in Thailand where there's clearly going to be some changes, and I think you're going to see things in Thailand that you wouldn't have expected.
What would be an example?
Well, they've already started looking at a law that's similar to the Bayh-Dole Act in the US. They're looking at ways to monetize and protect intellectual property, where they've got large amounts of dollars being spent on research and development in Thailand. Now, a fair amount of that might be agricultural based, but on the other hand, they've also got some pretty good researchers that are in some of the tech fields that, I think as they start getting their arms around, hey, I should protect this idea, And then they're going to naturally look at what can we do with it after we protect it. I think you might see them come out as being a dark horse potentially at some point down the road. I think other economies, or other countries may have a much longer road to get to something like that, but I think they'll start getting there maybe more sooner than later. It's interesting, if you look at IPR and how some people are starting to accept it, I'd almost equate it to what happened in kind of the telecom space, where there was countries that were lagging, but they kind of jumped ahead because they went straight from trying to put in landlines to putting in the infrastructure for mobile wire, for wireless.
Yes.
And so they kind of jumped ahead. And I think you're starting to see some of these countries look at IPR and maybe big jumps like that, as opposed to kind of slowly moving into it. So that's what I think might be interesting.
Let's finally talk about Japan, a country that's close to your heart. Another delegate here at IPBC Asia, who was sitting in that chair not a long time ago, from Japan, had statistics which showed that there are, 4 out of the top 10 companies filing for patents with the US Patent and Trademark Office were actually Japanese. Only 2 were Korean. And isn't that surprising when we think that the Koreans have, in a sense, reinvigorated the electronics industry in the way that the Japanese couldn't or hadn't? And yet here are the Japanese so strongly represented with patents. What's your take on how Japan is going to move forward on that, given that they are clearly still innovating very strongly, and yet the economy doesn't really reflect the fruits of that labor coming through? Do you think that it is perhaps innovation and this new IP which could pull Japan out of its generation-long malaise?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Matter of fact, traditionally Japan has always been very strong on the filing front. For years they were of the top 10 companies filing in China before even the China government was pushing for patent applications to be filed by Chinese companies. You could look at the list of the top 10 and 6, 7, 8 of them would be Japanese companies. They started filing in China relatively early, and they've always been big filers in the USPTO. So they've built up extremely strong patent portfolios that I would agree that they have not fully utilized. Now maybe they've included in some of their products, maybe they haven't, but they certainly haven't gone down the lines of looking to monetize it to the point of not even selling. Let's forget about litigation and licensing and all the rest. They weren't even interested in selling patents, I think, until just recently, now that it's been very difficult with the economy in Japan. And I think that is something that could help pull them out of there. They've had very strong research and development roots for decades.
What's keeping them from going that extra step, monetization?
I think, culturally it wasn't something that they were interested in doing. There was
but neither
also
was sacking people and retrenching people from companies. That's changed.
That's changed as well. And so I tell you, when I first started the company, one of my first deals with this Japanese company, and they were very concerned about the Japanese counterparts that were in the patent portfolio. There's some Japanese companies that flat out told me, we won't sell you those. They're worried about how it's going to be perceived with other Japanese companies or within Japan. And so that was really, I think, holding back a lot of the activity that should have started years ago. Was just that mentality, and I think that's changed now, partly and probably largely due to just the economy driving people to say, you know what, we need to make a change, and we've got some assets on the books here that we have not taken advantage of. What can we do to take advantage of them? Now, I'm not sure that you're going to see Japanese companies jumping into litigation in East Texas, for example, but I think you are going to see them coming up with ways to help monetize their portfolio, and we're already having many discussions with various Japanese companies to do that.
Last but not least, best kept secrets. You've got your finger on the pulse. You've got so many people in your office here at IPBC Asia, where you're the top sponsor. Obviously, you're also doing a lot of networking.
Right.
What are the secret tips that you're hearing around the place?
The secret tips. Well, I'm not sure that I have any real secret tips. There's certainly lots of business that's discussed here. We've got a number of ongoing projects, and there's some that I think are going to be along the lines of what I earlier talked about. I think there's a movement, particularly in Asia, because the companies look at putting, most of them don't have budgets of $100 or $500 or $1 billion to put into IP. They're really looking to use their 5-10 million pretty efficiently, and a lot of these portfolios are priced much higher than that. So I think some of the things that are happening now, and people are really looking for synergies and ways to come together to do deals where they can pool their resources and come up with portfolios and have access to them. not unlike what an Apple, Microsoft, and others have done for years in the US. And those, I think, are the things that I think are going to start coming more and more frequently here over the next year.
Great to talk to you. Thanks for spending the time with us today.
All right, thank you.
Guy Proulx from Transpacific IP here at IPBC Asia 2013.